All right, so for this video, I'm going to be doing a bokeh effect, which is just creating this like blurred out background, which is super pretty. So I want you to grab a something like this. We have this kind of paintbrush. You can either do an angled flat brush, an angled like a large one, or just a square brush. Whatever you want to use is going to be fine. I'm just going to use this one. And we're gonna go ahead and get the brush wet. I'm just using black and white today for this one so that you can just get the idea of the technique, which I like to use my fingers to do. And a lot of people are like, ask me like, how do you get this effect? So one thing that's fun to do in this style of background is to create a gradient. So I'm gonna make my background a little darker in the lower right corner. I'm gonna practice my brush strokes with water. So notice how I can just swoop from side to side all the way across in a smiley face fashion. And I'm just gonna go all the way like that up until I get to the upper left-hand corner. So I'm in the lower right, that's where we want it darker. And then we're gonna get a little lighter as we come to the upper left. So I have a little bit of moisture on there, which is just gonna help with the gradient. It also helps sometimes if you're working with heavier bodied paints to get your blending. It's sometimes helpful to mix a little bit of water into your white in advance. So sometimes you can just get a palette knife and just get a little bit of water or a paint thinner medium for acrylics, and then just mix in either some water or whatever to thin out your white paint. That way when you're blending, it's a little easier. Don't go too crazy. It shouldn't be like water, but you want it to be a little more fluid. So I'm gonna take white and black. Notice I have quite a bit of black at first because I want it to be darker in the lower right corner. And then I'm going to go ahead and do what I was just showing you with water. Now, as I want this pretty dark here, but as I go up, I'm just going to grab a little bit of extra white on my brush and then sweep it right on the top part of where I was. And then you just go kind of more and more white. Now I want it to be like a medium gray through the center. You don't want it to be so light that we can't do our effect. You want it to show up. So you still want it to be gray. We're not going for like too light at first, but try to keep that bent, a little bit of a bent line. You can always add more black to the bottom corner if it didn't get dark enough, and then just swoosh it in. Notice how having that base layer of water helps the paint go on really smooth. If you're not getting that, you can always mix a little extra water into your paint. And notice how I go up and down, up and down. You can go down and then up, and then add more white as you go up, and then you can pull it down and then back up. So it's just a back and forth kind of thing. This is a pretty small canvas too, so it gets a little trickier when you're on a big canvas, and then that time you might want to use a bigger paintbrush to help get it all the way across fluidly without, you know, losing your blending ability. But this is really fun. Notice how I can go down, kind of smooth it out, and then I can go back up. And this just ensures that your paint looks kind of smooth as you pull through. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Now, as I get to the upper left-hand corner, I want it to be pretty light. So it's pretty light up there. It's like pure white, but it's much lighter than here. Usually your darkest here, lightest up here in the upper left. And then I'm just going to smooth it out a little bit while it's still wet. Now, another thing about this style is it's a lot easier to do while your canvas is a little bit wet. Now, if it's not a little bit wet, you could still do it, but I suggest wetting whatever paint you're going to be layering on top so that that paint that you're layering isn't too thick. I'm making this a little darker down here, adding a little more black. I really want it dark in the bottom corner. Okay, now I'm done with that brush. And from here on out, we're just going to be using finger paint. I'm using my fingers. Now, if you want, you can also use something like a round brush, like this sort of thing, or just a round brush, or even a filbert, just a rounded top brush. But I find that it's just so much easier to do with the fingers and the canvas still being a little bit wet. Then what I would do is just take a little bit of white on my finger, just dip it in a clean finger here, and then you're going to find a spot where you want to do your effect. Make a dab. I usually dab with my finger that has the paint on it, And then I'll take another finger that has no paint and then use that to spread it around. So we go like this. And notice how it's blending into the background. It's not super harsh because it's still wet. Now, the more paint you use, the bigger you can spiral out. I'm just starting in the middle and then moving my finger and spiraling out until it blurs. And then you want to get different sizes. So some can be bigger, some can be smaller. And it just depends on how much paint you start with. So if I start with just a tiny dab, my end effect is going to be smaller. And then if your finger starts to get too much gray on it, notice how my finger is picking up the paint. You're just going to wipe your finger off. So use a rag or whatever. I'm just using my apron. That way you're not losing your ability to get the paint brighter. And you can always layer. So if I wanted one of these things to look a little brighter, I could wait for it to dry a little bit and come back in and layer and make it look brighter. And I'll show you how we can do that too, because your first layer, you want it to be done while the background's wet so that it looks really subtle. And then as we go into our second layer of this effect, we want it to be dry. That way, those dots and those little orbs that we're going to create on the second time is going to be brighter because the background's dry, so the white will be able to get much, much brighter. So don't forget, just wipe your fingers as you go because it's going to pick up some of that background color on there. Make some bigger by adding more white to begin with and spreading it out further, and then make some smaller by starting with a smaller amount of paint and then not spreading it out as far. So you're going to be able to get a large variety of sizes, at least 3. I always say 3 is always your magic number in painting. You want to have at least 3 different sizes. And we're just working with black and white today so that you can practice the technique without worrying too much about color mixing, because that's a whole different thing. And that could be really intimidating sometimes. So using the black and white just gives you the idea of getting different values, understanding the technique and what you're trying to achieve with it without getting too worried about colors. But even though this is a really fun to do with different colors. Super fun. Notice I have really small ones and then some medium ones and then some bigger ones. And you want to layer some on top of each other. This is such a relaxing technique. Where you paint, I could feel that my background is starting to get dry. Now, if you feel like you've got enough of this where it's really blending in and you want to start to get some brighter, you're going to want to use your blow dryer to speed up the process if you want to speed up the process. So I hit it with the blow dryer a little bit. Make sure your fingers are clean or dry. And then you're doing the same thing, but on top of that drier canvas. And this is going to help at getting some of those effects in that lighter section. They wouldn't really stand out before because it would just blend right in. But now they're going to stand out a little bit more because you're starting with layering on that drier paint. And then I'm going to layer on top of the other color, the other layer. So see how I can go make a new one on top of other ones, like off to the side a little bit or whatever. This just will create some more interest. It's really fun. But notice how much brighter it gets once you remove the wetness of the background, which really helps with softening and blending. So if you liked the look of that better, then you could always, you know, keep that in mind every time you do it. You know, make sure to get all your really subtle blending before the canvas gets dry, because it becomes a little bit harder to do that. Or you can add more water to this. So even if I were to just dip my finger in the water and then mix that into my white, it's going to make that more transparent and it will make it a little more subtle. So that's another thing to play with if you're getting too, if it's too thick and not subtle enough. It should blur around the edges. And if you're not getting that, use some water, you know, do what you got to do. It's going to be a little different for everyone. But yeah, I use the water to make it more subtle if my white is too thick, especially. So you got to be careful about that. Just mix a little bit of water into your paint. And you can even just take your finger and like stamp to make one that's kind of small, but maybe a little bolder. So, you know, you can play around with what different sizes and different ways of getting it on there. And the more you rub it out, the more it's going to blend with the paint that's behind it. And I really like enjoy this, so I can go on with it for a while, but you know, you're going to have to determine when is enough for you and whatever you're trying to create. So it depends on what's in the background, how simple, or what you're going to be putting in the focal. So this creates a bokeh effect, which is going to blur out the background, which is going to enhance your focal point, whatever that is. You know, so if you, depending on what you're putting on front and how complicated that subject matter is, I feel like the more complicated the subject matter is in your, you know, whatever you're painting on top of this, maybe the more simple you'll keep this. But if this, you know, is kind of part of the design a little bit more heavily and your focal point is really something simple, then maybe you can go a little more dramatic with this and a little more detailed with this. So you just have to decide based on what you're trying to, you know, create. You want to make sure you have different sizes. Notice I'm getting some really small ones by just stamping my finger lightly. I'm not even rubbing these out, but I don't have a lot of paint on. It's just barely any. And then just zone out and do it for a second. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and add a pink butterfly to the back of, to the top of this super fun bokeh effect. And we're gonna keep it really simple today. I'm gonna start with just the round brush. This is a number 6 round. It actually seems like more of a 4 round. All the brands are a little bit different, but this is the Princeton Select round, number 6. Now, the first thing I'm gonna do is just find my center point. So I'm coming to the middle right here. I'm gonna take some white on my brush and say, okay, that's the middle. I know where it is now. And I want my flower that the butterfly is gonna sit on top of to be white. And I'm just gonna make some petals coming from that point down. So see how I can just make a line that comes to that center point. And then as I come down through the center, they can get a little bit wider and a little bit shorter. And then I'm just going in a ring. And that's it. Now I'm also going to make the base layer for the wings. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and add my red. But I'm going to keep it a really light shade of pink for the first layer. And we're just going to create a side view. And we're going to do the colored part first, making a pink butterfly. So much fun. Now I'm just going to go from the center of the flower straight up and then just bend to the right and then pull down and then bend it back in. And then make your little bottom, same way but smaller, pulling back to the center point. And then color it in. Super simple today. We're not going to spend too much time. I just want you to get the, essence of this fun background we created and how you can put something really simple on top of it and make something that looks really cool. So without it being too complicated. Now I'm going to add more red to my brush to do back wing. The back wing just runs parallel with the front wing, and you're making a parallel line and then you're just swooping it down into the top of that first wing. And the back wing's a little darker because it's like, it's a shadow. Like that. Perfect. Now I want to create a little bit of pink in the flower. So I'm going to go ahead and mix my pink again. And I'm going to add just a little bit of pink right at the base of the flowers towards the center of your petals and just wisp out just a little bit. Nothing too crazy. Now let's let this dry. While we let this dry, I'm going to take my round brush and just add some stem down here. So I'm going to take my black paint and I'm going to pull from the base of the flower down towards the bottom of the canvas. And then you can add some little petals, something really simple. And we're keeping it really simple. I'm going to say that a lot because we don't want to go too crazy. I'm going to clean my brush again just to kind of clear it out. And then I'm going to use more black again. Now for this, I'm going to make the body of the butterfly, which is just going to run a tiny little diagonal line under the wings right on top of the center of the flower. And I'm going to give a little head and a little body, and the tail can taper off a little bit. You can add little antennae by just going to the top of the head and then pulling out like this. There we go. It's fun. And then we can create another shadow color by mixing red and black. We're going to mix red and black. And this is going to go under the center of our flower. And the flower's still a little bit wet, so it'll come together though. Now, if you need to speed up your drying process, just use a blow dryer. I'm going to do that really quick. All right, so now that that's dry, you can go in and add some more to it. Just keep using your round brush, any size you want. You can add a little more to the leaves, just using black. I'm just making them look a little more, like they have a little more character. And then we want to use that shadow color, which is your red and black. and add a little bit under the center of the flower. So I'm right in the middle and I'm just dabbing right there. And then you can pull out just a little bit too. Now we want to outline the butterfly. Before we do that, we want to add just a little bit more interest to the colors. So what I can do is go in there and clean my brush and add some more pink. But maybe it's a slightly different shade than my first shade. So it could still be pretty light. But notice I can pull in maybe like a little bit darker. And you're just getting some different colors and then maybe some more white. Try to be able to see at least 3 shades in the wings. And it's just going to make it look a little richer too on top of that background. You know, same thing with your flower. Maybe add some more white. I'm going for a really light pink flower. Really light pink, almost pure white. And I'm just adding a second coat on the petals. Pulling from the base or the tips of the petals in towards the center. And you can take that to the little top here too, the top of the flower. And then you can play around with adding more red again, you know. I'm gonna put a little bit of that in my flower center towards the bottom of the center. You can add more little bits coming out of the center into the base of the petals, just a little bit. And you can add more to the wings. So it's just fun to play with a few different shades before you go in and add like your super dark colors, which we're gonna do now. So once you have all that in, you can take a smaller brush if you want, or you can just keep working with the same brush. I'm gonna take a slightly pointier brush just for fun, and we're gonna outline the butterfly. So I'm gonna go to my front wing and just use the tip of the brush gently. And I'm outlining it. Maybe I kind of change look how I could ripple the brush stroke, make it like a little bit wobbly to change the shape. So you can really play with that. Same thing on the back, but it's a little bit further away and you're just making a little less detailed. And then I can go in and add a black tip to the wing. So I'm just going to thicken out that black. I'm going to do that on the bottom too. I'm just wiggling the brush and thickening it out. This is really loose. And then you can divide the top and bottom wing by doing a little black line there. And then you can create some texture in the wing, like those little butterfly veins. Those are really fun. So all I'm going to do is make some lines going from the tip of the wing and then coming down. Notice how they can connect and kind of make this like pretty pattern. You're in charge. So you can make any like fun little patterns that you want. We can do some lines over here too, in the back wing. Doesn't have to be that many. And maybe I want to go back. I'm going to clean my brush And maybe I want to go back to that black and red and then add some little dots to the base of like the center of the flower. Give it a little more texture. And then we can go in and add some dots. So I'm just going to take the white on the tip of the brush, nice and clean, and we can add dots to the tips of the wings. And they can be big or small. I like to make them a little big at the top here. And then they can get a little smaller as you go down. You can do a little bit up here too. And you can even add some highlights with white. You can add some pure white to the tips of your flower. To the very top of the center. And then you can even use some light pink to highlight maybe the top of the butterfly, their antennae. You know, you just want to add a little bit of highlight. Same thing with the top of the flower stem. So I can add a little bit of pink to that. And I can add a little bit of pink to the tops of those petals. Such a light touch. So much fun. And you can also add some like dots in the background. So I could take my brush with just the pure white again, or you could use pink and then you can just put dots in the background. Even though we did the bokeh effect, adding little dots like this just really enhances that. It doesn't have to go everywhere. Maybe you just keep it near the flower and the butterfly to enhance that spot.